Hi, I'm Cass. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my top favorite books of 2024. I had a little bit of a rough reading year. I really was struggling to find books that I was enjoying. I read a lot of books that I just didn't really vibe with or didn't leave memorable impressions on me, but I was able to compile a list of some of my absolute favorite books of this year, books that have really stuck with me throughout the year and books that have become my new favorites. I'm going to start with 5 honorable mentions and then move on to the top 5 leading up from 5 to 1, except for they're not really in any particular order other than number 1. That's typically how things go. I just have a bunch of my favorite books and I don't know how to rate them against each other, because how do you rate an epic high fantasy to a fun little romantic romp? It's really hard to pit one against the other, so I just compiled a list of about 10 books that have been just a delight to read, things that have really stuck with me, and books that I recommend to you all, and books that I love. Without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and jump into my first honorable mention. These are in no particular order, however, this is the most recent book that made the list, and that is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This book will take you on a journey like never before. It is a book that I'm not gonna describe in detail because going into this book knowing little to nothing is the best feeling ever, because it takes you truly on such a journey throughout this world. To give you a little bit of an inkling of what this book is about, we follow Zachary, and he's a graduate student up in Vermont, and one day he's just perusing his library and he comes across this book with no title and no author. He reads the first couple of chapters and he realizes that it contains a story from his childhood. A story from his childhood that no one should know except for him. This isn't one of the highest rating books. In fact, I've had books rate above this book. However, this book was so unique and really has stuck with me since I've read it. Erin Morgenstern and we didn't used to get along because I read The Night Circus back in high school and I found it to be very boring, and I didn't really appreciate Erin Morgenstern's prose at the time. However, diving into this book, I feel like The Starless Sea is so similar to The Night Circus and yet vastly different at the same time. We still get to have Erin Morgenstern's beautiful prose and writing and wonderful storytelling abilities. However, stuff actually happens in The Starless Sea, unlike The Night Circus, which is just vibes. So if you want an Erin Morgenstern book that's vibes but with a plot, I definitely recommend The Starless Sea. I will say Erin Morgenstern's writing is not for everyone. I would easily relate her writing to Laini Taylor, especially in Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares. They both have very purple prose and lyrical writing that I just absolutely loved getting to sink my teeth into. I highly recommend the audiobook as well. That is the main format in which I read this book, and it was just a delightful experience. This is such an ode to stories and storytelling and books, and it's wonderfully crafted, and there's also short stories in between Zachary's main overarching storyline, and those are some of my favorite parts of the book. I just cannot wait to own a copy of this book and to reread it and to annotate it and just absolutely devour it. It was a 5-star book for the first 3 parts. Part 4 and part 5 is when it really lost me, but it picked back up in part 6. So that's why it's not a super highly rated book on my list. I ended up giving it a 4.25 compared to a lot of like my 5 stars or like 4.75 stars that are on this list. But I feel like this has such a unique voice and is unlike anything I've ever read, and it truly is one of my new favorites. I just know to skip part 4 and part 5. I recommend avoiding any detailed synopsis or summaries. Going to this book knowing nothing is the best way to fully immerse yourself into the story and just enjoy the discovery of The Starless Sea. A year ago, I wouldn't have ever imagined that I would read this book, let alone have it end up in a favorites video, but here we are. Big shout out to my best friend Katie for recommending this book and just loving this book in general. The next honorable mention is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Now hold in your gasp of surprise. I know. How is this in the honorable mentions and not in my favorites list? We'll get to that and you'll understand. When I first read this book back in April, I too was very convinced that this was going to be a top favorite book. However, things change. Fear not though, there's plenty more Brandon Sanderson where this came from, because I'm telling you, 2024 was my year of Sanderson. It's gonna show. This book follows 3 main characters, Kaladin, Shallan, and Dalinar, and each of these characters come from very, very different places, and each have their own very distinctive goals and ambitions and backgrounds of what drives them to be the type of people that they are. They are very, very unique, which I found very important, because if this book had similar narratives narratives between the characters, I feel like reading a 1,000-page book where each character felt the same would kind of be a bore. Brandon Sanderson's world building is truly unmatched, and I'm so happy that I've finally dived into the Stormlight Archives. Roshar is such a cool world to be on because on Roshar there is this powerful storm that is constantly circling the world and wreaking havoc wherever it goes. But because of this constant storm, the ecosystem, the animals, the people, they've all adapted to the reality of this high storm that is constantly moving. I'm always really overwhelmed trying to explain Brandon Sanderson books because there's just so much depth in this book, and even if I spoke for the rest of the video just about The Way of Kings, I don't think I would cover the expansive nature of the Stormlight Archives. I mean, this book alone is over 1,000 pages. Every book in the series is over 1,000 pages, and there's 5 books out right now, so expansive, you feel me? The briefest of brief summaries that I could potentially give is centuries ago there was this order called the Knights Radiance, and they had these shard blades and shard plates. The weapons and the armor made them nearly invincible warriors, but at the beginning of this book, the Knights of Radiance dissolve for some reason. Now, this book primarily takes place on the Shattered Plane where battles are fought, wars are waged over these shard plates and shard blades, as well as a constant war between the Alethi and the Parshendi. The growth and change that each of these characters went through was so satisfying because while they were all growing and changing and maturing, each of the decisions and reasoning about why all these characters were changing were so vastly different, and it truly shaped them to becoming characters that I had such a delightful time following. Switching gears a little bit, like I said, high fantasy to YA romance. This book, Dungeons and Drama by Christy Boyce, was an absolute delight. It was like a little warm hug in the form of a book, and I just never stopped smiling throughout the entirety of reading this novel. I find myself leaning less towards YA the older I get, which kind of checks out because YA is young adult, so as I age, obviously I'm aging out of the genre a little bit, especially when it comes to books set in high school. I find the motivations of these high school students to be a bit trivial, but that's mainly because when you are in high school, literally your problems are quite trivial when you compare them to being out in the real world. But the way Christy Boyce wrote her characters were so charming and endearing that I couldn't help but root for them and their little high school dating struggles and problems. I thought it was so fun. And there was a lot more depth to the characters as well because each of them also had some family stuff going on at home that affected their lives, and D&D became a solace for a lot of these characters, and that's what brought them together. We follow Riley, who is this big musical theater nerd. She has these grand ambitions of becoming a Broadway director, and in order to achieve that dream, she decides she needs to see as many musical theater productions as possible, even if that means borrowing slash liberating slash stealing her mom's car to go to one of the shows. However, she gets caught red-handed in the act, and as a punishment, her mom sends her to work at her dad's game shop, trying to, I guess, teach her responsibility and perhaps don't steal my car. But Riley doesn't have time for a job. She has a Broadway dream to achieve, so she ends up bribing her coworker Nathan to work her shifts for her. What Nathan gets out of this bargain is a fake relationship to make his ex jealous. To further the fake dating plot, which I love fake dating, it's literally one of my favorite tropes, Riley is forced to join Nathan's ongoing D&D campaign with a bunch of his friends. And getting to see these characters fall for each other, like during their D&D campaign and outside of their D&D campaign, was so delightful. I just love nerds, and this book is just an ode to nerds and musical theater geeks, and it's just such a delightful read. It's very, very short. It's just under 300 pages, and the sequel, Dating and Dragons, literally comes out tomorrow, so you bet that I will be running to the bookstore first thing to pick up a copy. The next book is an honorable mention that is part of a duology that has been living in my head rent-free since I read the first one last year, and then I finally got around to reading the sequel, and that is A Fire Endless by Rebecca Ross, which is the second book in the Elements of Cadence duology. I seriously think I need to do a reread of A River Enchanted and then reread A Fire Endless as well, because I didn't give A River Enchanted 5 stars, and like I said, rent-free. I gave this book a 4.75, but again, I feel like if I had reread A River Enchanted, it would have been rated higher because then I wouldn't have had to struggle to remember what happened to our characters and where we left off. Regardless though, What a delightful time. This being a sequel, I won't go too much in depth about what happens in this particular book, but as a whole, the premise of the series, we're following Jack and Adarna on this magical island called Cadence. It's inspired by Scottish folklore, has elemental magic, and the island is divided into two rival clans. East and West, Tamerlane and Breckons. One side of the island is thriving, but using magic drains the user of their life, and the other side, they can use magic freely, but the island is suffering. So you can see why there's a major conflict between the two clans, and it has been happening for years and years at this point. I truly think this has become one of my favorite series of all time. Again, it's due for a reread, but the love and the romance and the characters we get to follow, they're all so strong, and there's so many different types of love in this book. Old love, new love, falling back into love. Just, it's such a romantic book, and I feel like this book series is not talked about enough because it's often overshadowed by Divine Rivals. I loved the Letters of Enchantment duology, but I truly loved the Elements of Cadence duology so much more. I just love, and the magic and the folklore and just everything about this book is just stellar. Sorry not sorry in advance, but we have another Brandon Sanderson book to talk about. If you don't like Brandon Sanderson, trust me when I say the rest of this video is not for you, but the novel that I'm talking about is actually a novella, and that is The Emperor's Soul. I have not read a novella where I've gotten this invested in a character and I've just been dying for more pages since reading The Emperor's Soul, and I think this is proof that Brandon Sanderson just constantly needs to be writing about badass main female characters, because Shay was stunning. In this world, Shay is what's called a forger. She's able to use these seals and rewrite an object's history to turn it into whatever she pleases. However, she's caught trying to steal from the palace, which is basically a death sentence, so she's locked away in prison until someone approaches her because the palace has a bit of an issue. The emperor is nearly dead / currently dying, and Shay has been tasked to forge the emperor with a new soul, simultaneously plotting her own escape because she's pretty sure that her death sentence still stands. Again, it's such a crime that this book is only 200 pages because I could have easily read 200 more, 300 more pages about Shay and about this magic system. I ended up reading Founderside by Robert Jackson Bennett right before reading this book, and they are very, very similar, but in a good way. Obviously, Brandon Sanderson came out with The Emperor's Soul first, so Robert Jackson Bennett was inspired by Brando Sando, so I do not want like a powerless Red Queen debate in my comment section about who wrote what first. I'm aware that Emperor's Soul came out first, but I think they both had a very unique spin on the world's forging. This book is also a really good gateway book into Brandon Sanderson, especially if you don't want to tackle like a 600+ page novel. I think this novella will introduce you to how Brandon Sanderson writes characters, his world development, and his magic systems. Obviously, he's improved a lot because this book was published back in 2012, and my man's writing so much every single year, so obviously his writing is improving, but I really think this is a good way to kind of test the waters to see if you like his writing style and how he develops certain things. And I think everyone should read Brandon Sanderson because he's the best. Those are the 5 honorable mentions, and now we're finally talking about the top 5 books. These are, again, in no particular order. The only one that is in a particular order is the one on the very top. I just struggle to compare different books to each other because, again, the same genre problem that I mentioned in the beginning. But number 5, no particular order, Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. What? You're talking about another Brandon Sanderson book? What's going on? I told you, 2024 was the year of Sanderson for me, and I meant it. I'm not sure if I loved this book because I went in with such low expectations and was just pleasantly surprised, because when I tell you my expectations were low, they were pretty low. Everyone told me that this being his first published novel, it wasn't as strong as his other ones, and I agree on that end. I still think it's such a fabulously crafted novel. Now, Elantris used to be the main capital of Arlon. It was a thriving metropolis, very magical, very beautiful, and then one day the magic failed. And in just 10 short years, this thriving, beautiful city is now filthy and run down and full of people that are considered cursed. One of our main characters we follow is Serene, who was married off to the crown prince, but by the time she arrives to Arlon, he's dead. However, she feels something a little fishy is going on with the prince's death, and so she starts investigating. And Serene's theory is correct. There is something fishy going on because Roden, the crowned prince, was actually banished into Elantris secretly because he ended up becoming cursed. There's also this third point of view that adds a very interesting dynamic to the three POVs that we follow, because he's a religious zealot who's determined to convert all of Irulan for his god's will. All of these characters have very distinctive narrative styles, and the dynamics when they start interacting, which of course is always my favorite thing about books with multiple POVs, is when they start overlapping. But when they do, it's such an interesting dynamic, and some of them juxtapose one another very, very well. There's a lot of religion and politics discussed in this novel. In fact, I feel like this is one of the heavier political and religious books that Brandon Sanderson has. All of his books discuss those two topics, however this one I feel like takes up the core of the story. It's a very slow-paced book, and I'm just shocked that I loved it as much as I did, truly. The action doesn't really start happening until the latter half of the book. However, in the former, I was still just loving my time getting to know these characters and getting to explore Elantris and the city. It's just stunning. With this being Brandon Sanderson's first published novel, truly, the man had everything to lose and nothing to gain, and yet his writing has just exponentially increased with every book that he publishes. I said this when I first read the synopsis of Funny Story by Emily Henry. If anyone was gonna pull off this crazy of a plot concept, it was gonna be Emily Henry, and I was proven absolutely correct. This is one of my favorite romance novels of this year. I have another one that I'll discuss in a little bit, but the plot, in case you're unaware, we're following Daphne and Miles. Now, Daphne's ex-fiance Peter decided to run off and get married to his best friend Petra, who happens to now be Miles's ex. So to convince Peter that she is A-okay with her life and him leaving her basically when they're about to get married, totally unaffected, because guess what? She's now dating Miles, his new fiance's ex. I said it before, I'll say it again, fake dating is one of my #1 tropes ever, and paired with the small town vibes of this book, stellar. Daphne and Miles' dynamic throughout the book is very well written because they're so vastly different characters, but they each bring out the best in each other. Daphne is a very uptight and quite reserved person who doesn't let a lot of people in. She's so comfortable with nobody knowing any details of her life that some of her coworkers literally thought she was an FBI protection. While Miles, on the other hand, comes across as a very laid-back, happy-go-lucky guy who people just like to talk to and like to dump their life stories on. Their relationship is so wonderful, and I definitely recommend the audiobook. I got to reread this book this year because when Katie and I went to Arkansas, we had a little bit of a drive to get there, and we listened to the audiobook together. It was really fun to discuss this book as it was playing with Katie, who was reading it for the first time, and it definitely solidified its spot in my top 5 favorite books because of that reread too. Emily Henry luckily has redeemed herself after Happy Place because I was really nervous that her writing was going to take a turn in a direction that I wouldn't enjoy, but luckily she didn't disappoint. Here's your Brandon Sanderson warning. Another one's coming up, and that is Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. Think about the feeling that you get and the visuals that you get from watching a really pretty anime and just put it into a book format, and Yumi and the Nightmare Painter is what you get. Two characters from vastly different worlds end up having their fate intertwined. This book is inspired by a manga and Japanese culture, and I loved every single page of this book. Yumi is from this peaceful world of meditation in gardens, and Yumi is this yokihijo, which means that she can commune with the spirits. So she's kind of the chosen one in this world. And because of that chosen one type status, she's very sheltered and secluded, and she just travels town to town. She stacks her stones, that's how she communes with the spirits, and helps each community that she visits. And the complete polar opposite and juxtaposition of Yumi is Painter, and Painter's world is a dark world of technology and reclusion and nightmares. Painter's job is to repaint nightmares into something less threatening to defeat them, and he's isolated in his own way because people just don't quite understand him. Like I said, their lives end up becoming intertwined, and through their interactions we get to learn more about this world and these characters, and how one is becoming more independent and while the other is becoming less independent, and learning that it's okay to lean on other people. This book is also filled with Cosmere connections that I didn't quite catch all of them because I tend to not catch Cosmere connections unless they're like explicitly explained to me, and I hadn't read a lot of other Sanderson books until after the fact that I read it. I don't regret reading them out of order because the Sanderson Lanch plot twist in this is absolutely mind-blowing. I just wish I could erase this book from my memory and experience it all over again. It was that good. I also think this is the most romance-leaning book that Brandon Sanderson has written, and I'm not mad about it. Like, Brandon Sanderson does romance and slow burn so well. If there's one gift I want to give to all these like romantasy and fantasy romance authors, it's just this book. Like, read this book, take some notes, and see how he does slow burn. See how he has a plot and he has this beautiful world and magic system, and these characters just so happen to fall in love with each other. But guess what? They have a personality outside just liking each other, and it's done so beautifully, and I love their character development, and I just cannot wait to reread this book. I knew that this book was going to be a banger right after I read the first book in this companion series, and that's Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Everyone was telling me when I picked up Part of Her World that book three was the book. Just for the Summer was so good, everything and more. And I was a little apprehensive at first because book one was so good. I loved Part of Your World. I was like, how is Abby Jimenez gonna top that? And then book two, I loved so much until the very end. And I'm like, how is she gonna top that? And then I read Just for the Summer, and I finally understood. The world was right. I loved it. I also annotated this book so much, and I hardly ever annotate books anymore, but this book, I couldn't not annotate. We're following Emma and Justin as they are fake dating, but with a twist. They find each other through Reddit because they are both convinced they have this curse. Every person that they date and then break up with, they move on to find their soulmate, the love of their life, the one. And yet Emma and Justin are both left alone. Emma and Justin figure if they just date each other, the curse will just cancel out. And in a way, they're kind of right. Abby Jimenez also has this ability to seamlessly intertwine deeper topics without bringing the mood down of her book. I read some romance books where they try to include like life shit and deeper topics, and yet the mood turns from fun romance to just this heavier book to get through. However, again, Abby Jimenez was able to seamlessly incorporate those elements, and instead of it being a mood changer, it instead made you more attached to these characters and gave these characters much more depth and relatability. It was such a cute story. I loved their love story, and because it's part of a companion series, you also get to see past characters crop up in the most unexpected yet satisfying ways. Abby Jimenez has truly become a new favorite romance author, and I can't wait to see what her next book will entail. I have a bonus book for you all because if you thought you could escape me talking about Freyrin for the 100th time, you thought wrong, and you should know me better. This manga has reached, should I get a tattoo for it levels? Be on the lookout. I've already started brainstorming potential tattoo ideas, so in case you're wondering how much I love this manga, that's where we're at right now. Now, it's called Freyrin Beyond Journey's End for a reason. We're following the elven mage Freyrin, and her and the party of heroes have saved the world. They defeated the Demon King and brought world peace. The party then parts ways and they all go on with their lives. However, Freyrin being an elf means she's basically immortal, especially compared to the mortal members of her party. The death of one of her party members brings on a stark realization of this immortality, and she's bound and determined to connect more to humanity because previously she thought it was kind of a fruitless task because she's immortal. She's going to outlive everyone. But she connected so deeply to these characters throughout the 10 years they were traveling together, and I guess she wants to emulate that feeling again. Now, Freyrin is literally the definition of badass bitch and also super powerful, maybe a little too powerful. However, even though she's this all-powerful, perhaps overpowered mage, the story still creates such good stakes for her, and I just love every single volume of this manga. We have this new party that we're following with Freyrin containing Stark and Fern, and their dynamic is so bloody cute. And Fern is kind of her apprentice, while Stark is a warrior. The art style is beautiful, the dialogue and character work is stellar, and I just will never shut up about recommending this series. It's a series full of side quests. They have this very far off destination that they're working towards, but in the meantime, it's side quest this and side quest that, and I'm just here for this wonderful story, and I want to reread it so bad, but I might have to just settle for rewatching the anime, which I also highly recommend, especially the soundtrack. Stellar. And now is the moment you've all been waiting for, and that is my #1 favorite book of 2024. Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson. I thought I read Brandon Sanderson's best work. I thought I knew what a Sanderson Lanch was. I didn't realize what I was missing by taking so long to read the Stormlight Archives. This is book 2 in the Stormlight Archives, and I've heard from most people that book 2 is their favorite, and oh my god, I understand why. I mean, I haven't read past book 2 in the series, so like, I'm not one to judge, but I won't be surprised if this stays being my favorite Sanderson work. If this book wasn't such a brick, I would have been pacing while reading this book. So much happened. I was on the edge of my seat. It's been so long since I've been this invested in characters and the story. Oh, so good. I loved Way of Kings. However, Words of Radiance, I felt such a deeper connection to the characters, especially Shallan. Her story arc has already been fascinating, and I'm sure it goes in a completely different direction than what I'm expecting it to. I just love our characters so much. Plus, we've finally gotten to the point where all the character POVs are overlapping, and I know I've said this before, but like, that's my favorite thing about books with multiple POVs. It's when they all finally come together and you get to see them interacting, and you get to see one character's opinion of another, and then that character's opinion of the other person. Some of the best scenes involve two characters in the same place. One in particular, rent-free, y'all. Actually, two. There's like 2 major scenes in this book that are just living up here. Actually, you know what? This whole book is just living rent-free, okay? And it's so big, I should be charging it rent at this point. I cannot wait to continue on the Stormlight Archives. Oathbringer is certainly on my January TBR. I want to read it as soon as possible so I can catch up and quit feeling FOMO about Wind and Truth. But if you haven't already, and I need to be the one to put you on the Stormlight Archives, consider this your sign. Those were my top favorite books of 2024. I was gonna try to stack them all, but I think that would go above my head. So I just have the top 5 that I actually own here. I would love to know y'all's top favorite book of the year. It's always fascinating to see everyone's favorite books all just in one place, and I adored filming this video. I hope that y'all pick up these books and let me know what you think about them, because anytime one of you pick up a book that I recommend, it just makes my heart so happy, because I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys trust me enough to pick up an entire book because of me? You should just see my reaction every time someone tells me that they read Ranger's Apprentice. I really do hope that you got some wonderful recommendations out of this. Even though overall this year's reading wasn't necessarily like the best, I still found some absolute new favorites, and I've enjoyed getting to share them all with you on YouTube. But thank you so much for sticking with me throughout my sporadic posting schedules and my long breaks. I just love making videos for you all, and I don't see myself stopping anytime in the future. Thank you so much for such a wonderful 2024, and I really hope to see you next year. Toodles!